brothers, sisters, friends, enemies, and neutrals. Some subject matters are large, and it's difficult to complete it in one setting. When I was in the legislature dealing with trying to get rid of the death penalty, the analogy I would use is that of a hippopotamus. And I'd tell them, were I hippopotamus, you could put a bushel basket full of fruit in front of me. I could open that wide mouth and swallow it all in one gulp. But I'm not a hippopotamus. We're not dealing with a bushel basket full of fruit, but we're dealing with the death penalty. And there are a lot of people who are in favor of it. I am one of those strongly opposed, so I have to do it incrementally, a bite at the time, even though I like to swallow it in one gulp. This subject that I have today is going to have to take me 2 sessions to complete it. It's a very important one, and it is abortion. If men got abortions, if men were pregnant, and everything that's the way it is now would remain so, do you think a man would have trouble getting an abortion? Not at all. What they would do is say, "Come on in, old bloke." And you know who's saying that? McDonald's and Burger King. They would be giving the bloke an abortion with a side of fries and a Coke. And nobody would raise an eyebrow. No cat would whimper. And these men would consider their abortions the way that the old gunslingers considered shooting somebody and killing them, just another notch on the gun. Women are a majority of the population. That partially is explained by the fact that when wars occur, large numbers of men are killed. Women don't need to demonstrate in the street. They don't need to get frantic. They need to do what Black people and everybody else who has an issue needs to do. That's vote. Vote, vote. Politicians fear voters more than they fear anything and anybody else. One thing that happened just recently in Kansas is called a red state because the Republicans dominate. There are 350,000 more registered Republicans than there are Democrats in Kansas. The issue was put on the ballot as to whether or not a woman's right to abortion should remain a constitutional right in Kansas. And the people who favor women having the right to take charge of their own bodies and their own future voted to keep that right in place. By a vote in a state called a red state, the right of a woman to have an abortion remained in place. Kansas, of all places. So little Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz could go back to Kansas from the land of Oz, because if she wound up in that family way and didn't want it to be that way, she could go to Kansas and get an abortion. In Utah, they have, through the legislature, put in place one of those bonehead, silly white male bills, along with deluded white women, that would ban abortion in all situations except where the woman might die if there is not one. Fortunately, under the Biden administration, the Justice Department filed an action in federal court to strike that law down as violating the federal law. The federal law protects women's right more than the U.S. Supreme Court, where the racist, anti-women dominate, and I might add Catholics. What people don't realize is Catholics are the largest single religion in this country. There are not more Catholics than all other religions put together, but there are more Catholics than in any other religion. And right now, the Catholic doctrine, to a great extent on some issues, is driving the Supreme Court. There was a guy who took the name Mr. Dooley, and he wrote political satire and commentary many years ago. And he said he could not say whether the flag followed the Constitution, but he could say that the Supreme Court follows the election returns. And that's what this Supreme Court has done. And one of the biggest jackasses on there is Clarence Thomas, a handkerchief head Uncle Tom. And worse. What am I getting to? That women are protected to a greater extent by the federal government than by the U.S. Supreme Court. The argument made by the Justice Department is that federal law requires hospitals to provide the care a woman needs for her health, and not only when death might result if she doesn't get that help. So a woman having an abortion in Utah would be protected to a greater extent by what the U.S. Justice Department is doing than what the legislature in Utah has done and the simple-minded people in Utah have tolerated. I love women. I was born in bed with a woman. What right does some man or simple-minded woman have to dictate what another woman is going to do in the most personal area of her life? They're meddlesome. They're like the Puritans. They came from England to worship in their own way and make others do the same. I am going to read something from the Bible. I can find a biblical verse, I've told people, for everything. So in this case, I am going to spend some time giving my background through articles and other commentary in the newspaper. Will it be like boasting? Of course. But as I say, it's a poor car that won't toot its own horn. But let me, since people pretend to be Christians, or maybe Christians are the vicious people that history has shown, the Catholics who burn people alive at the stake. There's a woman called Joan of Arc who is a saint. The Catholic politicians in those days didn't like what she was doing, so they had her proclaimed a witch. They took all this wood and piled it up. They took this woman and tied her to the stake up and down, and then they lit the fire. And imagine what that would be like. Have you ever picked up a hot pot and you could let it go right away? Taking a sip of coffee that was hotter than you thought, out it goes. But have you ever thought of somebody taking your hand and putting it against the side of a red hot stove and holding it there? Take an electric stove where the eyes simply light up, no flame is in a gas stove, and put your hand on there and turn it up to the highest level where every circle is red, and hold your hand on it. The sizzling, the smoke, the stench of burning flesh. Imagine a woman being placed in that situation with the piles of wood, and the Christians, the Catholics, the Pope, the bishops, the archbishops, the priests, the nuns, the brothers, the deacons, all of them went for it in their official capacity, but there were Catholics opposed to it, and because they opposed that, they wound up at the stake themselves. They lit the fire, and amid this woman's screams, the smell of burning flesh, the smoke, her hair caught fire, and the Catholics got their jollies watching a woman burn to a crisp. That's Christianity. So I don't ever want to be mistaken for, blamed for, as, and insulted by being called a Christian. But let me read what a Christian wrote. He's considered the greatest of apostles, Paul. And this is from the Bible, the King James Version. 2 Corinthians, the 11th chapter, 16th verse. I say again, let no man think me a fool. If otherwise, yet as a fool receive me, that I may boast myself a little. That which I speak it not after the Lord, but as it were foolishly, in this confidence of boasting. Seeing that many glory after the flesh, I will glory also. For ye suffer fools gladly, seeing ye yourselves are wise. For ye suffer, if a man bring you into bondage, if a man devour you, if a man take of you, if a man exalt himself, if a man smite you on the face, you suffer that. I speak as concerning reproach, as though we had been weak. Howbeit, whensoever any is bold, I speak foolishly. I am bold also. Are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they the seed of Abraham? So am I. Are they ministers of Christ? I speak as a fool. I am more. In labors, more abundant. In stripes, that means lashes, above measure. In prisons, more frequent. In deaths, often. Of the Jews, 5 times received I 40 lashes, save one. 39 were the ones they give. They had the cat o' 9 tails, or this whip that had 3 prongs, and you got 13 of those, which gave you 39, or they might actually hit you 39 times. Of the Jews, 5 times received I 40 stripes, save one. Thrice, that means 3 times, was I beaten with rods. Once was I stoned. Thrice I suffered shipwreck. A night and a day I have been in the deep. In journeyings often, in perils of waters, in perils of robbers, in perils by mine own countrymen, in perils by the heathen, in perils in the city, in perils in the wilderness, in perils in the sea, in perils among false brethren, in weariness and painfulness, in watchings often, in hunger and thirst, in fastings often, in cold and nakedness. Besides those things that are without, that which cometh upon me daily, the care of all the churches. Who is weak, and I am not weak? Who is offended, and I burn not? If I must needs glory, I will glory of the things which concern mine infirmities. The God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, which is blessed forevermore, knoweth that I lie not. In Damascus, the governor under Emeritus, the king, kept the city of the Damascenes with a garrison, desirous to apprehend me. And through a window and a basket was I let down by the wall and escaped his hands. Paul said he was going to boast, and he boasted. And one other time he talked about the Hebrew of Hebrews. He sat at the feet of Gamaliel, the greatest rabbi of all time. But anyway, let me boast through the newspapers. This is dated June 3rd, 2001. Chambers again, a dominant force. I didn't write this. Quote, if it's hard, I get strong by doing my hard things, not by running. That's why I'll stand on this floor and oppose these bad bills when others will run for cover and try to be nice and coy. Let's pass it anyway and be good guys and women. So for me, I'm going to fight this. I'll fight it tooth and nail, and I'll fight it for 8 hours. Senator Ernie Chambers, March 12th, on a bill relating to teen drinking LB 114. They were going to put very harsh punishments against youngsters that did not apply to adults. And I did not believe in any person, any group, any race, religion, sex being opposed and oppressed by the laws that were put in place by the body of which I was a member. If this legislative session had been a horseshoe game, Governor Mike Johans would have been the state. Many horseshoe throwing senators were doing what they call their thing. But even as the governor's ideas shaped the broad contour of the session, the melodic voice of Senator Ernie Chambers of Omaha filled the legislative chambers, slowing debate for days, forcing some senators to change or abandon their bills, and in the end, assuring there would be no time for the controversial fetal homicide bill, which would make it a crime to kill an unborn child. It's the way the thing was written. These two personalities appeared to dominate the 2001 legislative session. In the end, Johans got most of what he sought. Senators approved all but one of his more than a dozen major proposals. The Appropriations Committee followed the governor's lead on much of the mainline budget. Senators overrode only 2 of his more than 30 vetoes, and they refused to raise the sales tax to help school districts give teachers better pay raises, a proposal Johans promised to veto. And I was against the sales tax on any bill under any circumstances because it hurt the poor more than the rich. The poor paid exactly the same amount in sales tax as the rich people. In other words, Little Orphan Annie paid as much as Daddy Warbucks. I'm going to reread something that I'd read earlier. Even I make mistakes, but I make mine in public. But even as the governor's ideas shaped the broad contours of the session, the melodic voice of Senator Ernie Chambers of Omaha filled the legislative chambers, slowing debate for days, forcing some senators to change or abandon their bills, and in the end, assuring there would be no time for the controversial fetal homicide bill, which would make it a crime to kill an unborn child. The way they put it, if a woman had conceived from the point of conception, and if there were an accident of some kind, and that fetus or that embryo was destroyed, a person would be convicted of a crime. And I didn't go for that. Here's something Chambers said. Now, this is not X-rated, so nobody needs to go running out of here. Members of the legislature, for too long in Nebraska, too many people have had their noses in other people's crotches. They're concerned about what consenting adults do behind closed doors with other consenting adults, and I have no concern with that. I do have concern about human beings. I believe that anything born of a man and a woman, born, I emphasize, is a human being. Chambers, April 3rd, on a proposal to ban housing discrimination against gays and lesbians. Johans eventually vetoed the measure, and I continued to fight for the rights of those people. I think what I'm going to do is take this up during the second portion or the next session that I take so that I won't have to rush through it. I will spend a little more time on what I was speaking of here in terms of my own activities. I have always, once I began to think for myself, done what I believe was right for me to do. And even on that, I have a quote from Paul the Imposter. He said words to the effect, and I'm paraphrasing, when I was a child, I thought as a child, I spoke as a child, I believed as a child. I behaved as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. There were many things in the religion of the brand presented in the church of which I was a member called the Church of God in Christ, I-N. Some people who are not familiar with that church call it the Church of God and Christ. It is the word in, God in Christ, which shows how little regard people have for that particular denomination because they didn't take time to even find the name of it. But many people in that church were older. They couldn't read. They pretended that they could. And they would hear something quoted or read, and they wouldn't get it right. One person, he was a traveling evangelist. They go around the country trying to make living, hustling these churches who believe anything somebody from another state will come and give them. They're so flattered that somebody from someplace else came to talk to them. He said, the Bible talks about the time coming when men gonna be running around here in their underwear, dragging out these crazy women and taking them off and doing bad things to them. The Bible didn't say they will come in their underwear or take women out in their underwear. It said they will enter windows at night, leading away foolish women unawares, tricking them. There was a person who was a minister, and he couldn't read, so he would have to approximate words. There's a book in the Bible as I say, it is Colossians. There's a place called Colossus, and the people who lived there were Colossians. He had never read the word because he couldn't, and the closest word he could think of was galoshes. So he was going to preach a sermon, and he said, my subject comes from galoshes, and he gave the verse, and it was all the people could do who knew how to read, keep from falling to the floor in gales of laughter. If you don't know something, don't pretend you know, because your ignorance will find you out. I've told you all this before, a lot of hypocrites in these churches. So this one guy came. Now, not only was he a traveling evangelist, but he wore a black robe and it had a red inner lining. And sometimes he would throw his collar back so they could see it was red. And he could speak the king's English the way the king would speak it. And he even mispronounced English if the Bible mispronounced it. And in talking about David killing Goliath, the Bible said that David took this stone and slang it, S-L-A-N-G. Slang is a word that relates to very colloquial speech, but he's slang it. But anyway, this preacher said, God can do whatever he wants to do with the king's English. Well, God didn't speak English. The Bible was translated from various languages under the order of King James. And that's when the King James Version came into being. And they had various scholars. Some of them were drunks. Some of them were adulterers. Others were other unsavory people, but they were scholars. And when they came to a particular passage and they couldn't agree on how to translate it, they did it not by praying to God and fasting. They took a vote and majority ruled. So there are things in the Bible that got there as a result of a vote of these scholars who are translating it pursuant to the order of King James. how do I know that? Because I read and I can understand what I read. But at any rate, these churches are a place where you can get an education like no place else. While I was there, I believed what these old people told me, but I could read. And I read the Bible for myself, but I would not contradict anything they said because they were mean-spirited. They liked to swat children. They liked to hit them with switches in Sunday school class if they didn't know the answer, even though the Bible said, suffer the little children to come unto me and forbid them not. He didn't say, bring the little children to me and make them suffer. So these church people got some of their clauses in the wrong order to justify what they were doing. But there were some things that I picked up in church that stayed with me because they made sense. And one of the things that made sense to me, which they didn't practice in that church, was that I cannot justify any wrongdoing I do by the wrongdoing of somebody else. I cannot make myself strong by standing on somebody else's shoulders and pushing them down. I could not blame somebody else for the wrong that I did when I knew it was wrong that I did it. So that principle of being responsible for my actions has stayed with me. And when I gave that affirmation, when I became a senator, that I would discharge the duties of this office to the best of my ability, that meant that even though I was elected by district, I was a state senator. Therefore, every resident, not just citizen, because there were people who were what they call undocumented people and others from other states. Any resident within the confines of the state of Nebraska would be my constituent. And if anyone brought to me a problem, and it was a legitimate problem, that person or those people, the one was or the group were being harmed in some way by the government, a governmental agency, or a person, and it fell within the range of what I ought to do as a state senator, that person got my help. And that's why I got called from all over the state. When the farmers were in serious trouble, they wanted me to go to Washington and represent them because they said I knew enough about agriculture, more about it than most people who were in it. That's because I read, I studied, and I understood what I read. And they wanted me to go there, and they signed a petition with hundreds of signatures to establish that I was indeed the one who would speak for them. And I told them, that is not one of my duties. You have to get one of your own to do that. And the general consensus was, but none of our own know agriculture like you do. Nobody has studied the law like you do. But more than that, nobody will be true to our interests like you will be. I said, well, be that as it may, I won't do it. You're going to have to call your representatives to account. Call those you voted for to account. But those that you voted for who are not taking care of your interests, as well as I take care of your interests, are doing things to harm the people who sent me down here. If I would tolerate it, they would lash me with a whip. And if it weren't for the federal government, they would still be putting on pillowcases, bed sheets, and carrying an American flag and torches and lynching us and burning us alive in a Christian ceremony. Those are the things I would give back to these people. And I told them, put the pressure on those who represent you to do what you say that you believe I would do for you. When if I was going to conduct myself in the way your representatives do, I would tell you every time you come to me, go to Senator so-and-so, or to all of you, go to the white senators. You have 48 of them, and you're going to come to the one black man. Then you're going to try to make me feel like it's my obligation to do these things because I know more than the others, or I will stand up more firmly than the others. That is not my responsibility. And that's when I tell them, you white people. And they say, we don't like to be referred to that way. I say, why? Are you not white people? They say, but when you say you white people, I say, then what you have done is just explain to yourself why we as Black people don't like to be referred to by white people as you people. And you don't want to believe that a shoe pinches until it's on your foot, pinching your foot. Now, as I always terminate it, in the words of the canary, who was notified that the cage was ajar, I'm out of here.
Thank you for watching the Ernie Chambers Show. If you'd like to make suggestions, email us at ewcfacts@gmail.com. That's ewcfacts@gmail.com. This has been an EWC Communication production.